Welcome everybody to this panel on the left's agenda for education and children. Everywhere in the country, particularly in England, the challenges facing children in the education system are significant, whether it's unaffordable childcare and slashed early years services, the most disadvantaged pupils falling behind their more affluent peers, persistent failures to support children with special educational needs and disabilities, fewer people accessing training and adult skills provision after years of cuts, and worsening terms and conditions for staff, including teachers and university staff. So the next Labour government, which will hopefully not be too far to go, hopefully, is going to face a significant group of challenges. But we must also be reflective of what Rachel said in her speech, that we can't do everything we want all at once. We'll have to maximise value for money and ensure that our education policy and every pound we spend is done so in a progressive way. So today's discussion on the left's agenda for education and children is incredibly vital, and I'm glad that you're all here to participate. We're going to have a panel of fantastic speakers who are going to provide a range of perspectives, and then we're going to open out to the Q&A. So the first person we're going to hear from is Bridget Phillipson MP, the Shadow Secretary of State for Education. Before she was appointed in that role in November 2021, she was Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury and has been MP since 2010. Bridget, over to you.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Ben. And I know we're pushed for time, so I'm going to make sure I keep my remarks as brief as possible, and then hopefully we can have lots of questions and discussion. Thank you very much for the invitation to be with you. It's a real pleasure. In the time I have available, I'm just going to set out an outline of some of the biggest challenges for the left in opposition and for the left in government, and how it is we go about delivering real change for our children and across our education system. Now, at a simple level, our agenda for children and education is straightforward, and the test of success is simple. We want excellence for every child in every school in every corner of our country. We want the amazing opportunities that some children already enjoy to be there for all of our children. Now, education, of course, is about all of us, not just about children and not just about schools. And if I had the time, I would talk a bit more about our agenda on lifelong learning, on skills and growth, and on the need for government to treat our brilliant universities as a public good, not a political battleground. But today I'll focus on children, and I want to make the point that the world in which our children grow up has changed very fundamentally over the last 60 years. And it's about time that our focus and the frame of our thinking did the same. Children are born into and grow up in a world which has had two huge changes from the world of the 1960s. It's far more unequal between families, but it's more equal within families. And the latter is about how we focus on the fact that so many mothers in particular are now in work alongside fathers, and our policy focus needs to reflect that. Now that, of course, is a brilliant success, and we should be justly proud as a party of our role in making that happen. Now, the way for that was cleared not just by legislation around equal pay and equal treatment for women from the 60s through to 2010, but also the introduction of child benefit in the 1970s and the innovations of tax credits under the last Labour government. But the searing inequality that we see now between families in our society means that for too many children and in too many families, for households both in and out of work, our children don't get the start in life that they deserve. And in short, I believe that children are being fundamentally failed by this government. But to achieve change requires us to build a coalition. Now, for many years, discussion of childcare, not just in the early years, but for the whole period from the end of parental leave to the end of primary school, has been dominated with an insistence that somehow it's about whether we're thinking about children or whether we're thinking about parents. And I just reject that binary choice. Now, of course, different interventions have different purposes, different effects. We can all see that. And we all know that the system we have is the legacy of a checkered past of different and of conflicting purposes. But we're also here as politicians and as activists, and the policy detail isn't enough, because we need not just to interpret the world, but to change it. And the challenge for the left is how we deliver better for our children right throughout their lives, for themselves and for their families, and how we build that coalition for change. And that's why when I talk about childcare, I don't just mean in the early years, important though that is. Because the early years are over very quickly, and the lives of parents in the coalition that we need to build need to take a much bigger span. And we have to look at the first decade of children's lives, both for themselves and for their families. And that's why at the conference last year, I announced breakfast clubs in every primary school as the first step towards a modern childcare system. And we chose that because it supports children to learn and it allows parents to work. And we are looking at interventions about how we bring that coalition together, not to force it apart, and how we use that to deliver the next Labour government. So the challenge that I have for all of us as we develop a broader ambition for our children is to avoid the temptation to divide, to reduce, to focus too tightly, but to keep our eyes on the bigger picture and the bigger prize of building an education system fit for the times that we live in, that fits our children and our families to succeed in tomorrow's world, not yesterday's. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that speech, Bridget. And one of the fantastic things about working with the Foundation for European Progressive Studies with this conference is that we also get to hear from a European perspective, because it's important Labour, when we're preparing for government, listens to and learns from other countries. So in that spirit, I'm glad to welcome Joao Albuquerque MEP, who is the Socialist Party MEP and has been since 2022 from Portugal. He was previously an advisor to Portugal's Ministry of Internal Administration, and excitingly, he also served as president for the Young European Socialists. Joao, over to you.
Thank you so much, Ben. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. It's a pleasure to be here, and I make your words my own, hoping that a new Labour government will come to power very soon, and that you get a chance to reverse and to change this country for the better. I think when we are talking about education and children, there are two fundamental questions. One is, what is the role that we want our schools to play in our society? And the second one is, how do we see the development of our children? And in this regard, to answer these two questions, I think there are three main challenges. If we look into how society is organized these days, people are more and more living in circles, in bubbles that are not anymore. We are not anymore private or having relations with people that are outside of our socio-economic bubble, I would say. And in this regard, the public school was always this mingling and mixing factor of bringing people from different uprisings together and creating a sense of community and a sense of society that would add to the values that we have as a community. And this has been lost when we went into a more and more private schools and to actually having people living more and more separate, because this segregates society rather than making it more unite. And I think that on this particular regard, children have a fundamental challenge, because to many children, and I think this happens in the UK as much as it happens in many EU countries, for many children, school is actually one of the main pillars or one of the main places where they can still get access to things that they cannot get at home. And for example, in Portugal, for some kids, and especially this happened during the crisis years, school was the only place where children had access to a hot meal, for example, during their day. And of course, this has to lead us to think of what role the school has to play. And this goes as well together with mental health problems, for example. We know that school plays a major role in tackling these issues, not only in terms of defining gender identity, but also all sorts of issues that kids nowadays face, that we also faced back then, but that are more acute today, and that we actually need to face an answer. So I think we, as a first challenge, we need to rethink the role that school plays in society and the kind of instruments that the school has to offer to kids, because the challenges are very different than what they were before. The second challenge is regarding education methods, I would say. If it strikes me very deeply that the education methods, despite of all the changes that we had in society, are probably the ones that evolved the less. Society has evolved technologically in terms of, in many ways and very deeply And I don't think that education methods in many, many ways have accompanied these changes. So I think that I'm learning, or that I've learned when I was in school, the same way that my parents have learned. And I think that my son, regretfully, will still learn, of course with some differences, in the same ways of the way I learn. And this has to change, because nowadays it doesn't exist this thing, what was the name of the first US president? No, we instantly go to Google and we clear this out. So technology plays a role, and we need to adapt the learning methods to the reality of what we have today, and also into the way that kids are brought up, and the way that they learn and they get they apprehend knowledge. The third challenge is regarding the role that school can play in forming citizens. In many, many ways, we have seen how education is always a very divisive aspect, because every time, at least in the EU, we see this in the Parliament very often, every time that there is a discussion regarding education, the far right always brings the idea of cultural wars and Marxist wars, that we are bringing about changes and indoctrinating children. And this is not the case. School needs to be a place for people to feel safe, to feel included, and to be able to express themselves in the best of their capacities and the best of their qualities. So I think that school really has a role to play in terms of forming citizens, and that we need to move away from a very goal-oriented perspective of education regarding objectives and orienting everyone towards university and fulfilling some kind of role in society in this aspect of getting a graduation and so on, into actually use school not only to bring about problem-solving capacities, but also in order to form the citizens of tomorrow. So this would be the main message that I would like to convey today. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you so much for that contribution. Our next speaker is Mariana, who is the chair of the Fabian Women's Network. I think this is the first time we've been together since your election, so I say congratulations on being elected chair of the Fabian Women's Network. You've obviously previously served as vice chair and treasurer, so you have a long experience with the Fabian Society. Mariana is also a councillor on Lambeth Council for Streatham Well, and she serves as the Deputy Cabinet Member for Children and Young People. Mariana, over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the warm welcome. Yes, like many local councillors in the UK, I'm horrified by the reality of austerity. And in particular, you know, when you look at London, that has lost out in a lot of levelling up money, and you think actually the reality for a council like me in Lambeth is that there are 43% of children in Lambeth are living in relative poverty. Poverty is the enemy in a struggle to prevent what is widely recognised as resulting in poorer educational attainment and employment opportunities. And when it comes to children, let's not forget that before the first case of COVID was reported in the UK in January 2020, the World Economic Forum had already released a global social mobility index, and only a handful of the 82 countries that had been surveyed had the right conditions to foster social mobility. And the UK had poorly ranked 21st and was deemed less socially mobile than most G7 economies, with only the US and Italy falling behind. And business knows this, and in the UK, several large corporates have started conducting their own research, because they know there's a potential risk to their sustainability if they can't recruit homegrown talent. PwC, a well-known company, has conducted a research on driving social mobility, which has revealed that most of the public agrees that COVID-19 has actually made social mobility worse. And there are widening gaps in society. And when I consider what the Labour Party should be promising on education, as it builds up a programme for the 2024 general election. I believe an important policy should include a razor-sharp focus on the role of corporate social responsibility. Corporate social responsibility, for those that aren't aware of what it is the idea that a company should play a positive role in a community and consider the environmental and social impact of business decisions. We on the left rightly focus on fair taxation. But in addition, I would, really propose a cultural shift is needed to look at the responsibility businesses should have in their communities. For a Labour government, this means that there would be huge opportunities to invest, collaborate, and scale successful changes within education. Now, in addition to my role in the Fabians as chair of Fabian Women's Network and as being a Lambeth councillor, I'm also a Guy's and St Thomas's governor. And it's been incredible when I've looked at the role of healthcare, and I've looked at education and children in that role. And I sort of was really shocked when I sort of looked at the healthcare sector and realised that, most children I speak to at a push could probably identify 10 different NHS jobs. But in a typical NHS trust, there's over 350 different NHS careers. And so, yes, you think about clinical jobs, but there are a wealth of others, from estate management, admin roles, medical equipment technicians. There are new innovative areas that we are pioneering and young people really should be aware of. And a child obsessed today with, say, video games should really be focused and guided to look at AI automation and robotics. I've been able to look at the gap in most of our children not even having an access to knowing opportunities, and I've been able to push in my role as governor to have a careers day for Lambeth State Schools. And there's been engagement before with a big organisation like the Guy's and St Thomas's, but really just with select private schools have generally had parents already in the know about key positions. In my role, as a governor, I'm arranging events where the chairman, non-executive directors and staff from across the trust meet with and engage with young children, local children, way before they're starting to make their career decisions, so we can actually have real influence. And I've insisted the trust is much more proactive about widening participation with the community. And the aim is obviously increased placement for local school children. So my ask for the Labour Party, focused on education policy, is to see that there's a real opportunity for the Labour government to do things differently. We can be informed by international learning, and we can collaborate with business and the third sector, so we can go beyond reversing the impact of the pandemic to demonstrate our values and push us forward as a global leader. And I'm convinced that this approach will create tangible long-term improvements to our education outcomes, positive for children and young people, not just in Lambeth, but across the country.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mariana, for that contribution. Our next speaker is Anne Longfield, CBE, who is a campaigner for children. She's currently chair of the Commission on Young Lives, and I would encourage you to look at the work they've done. She'd previously served as Children's Commissioner for England. In fact, you presented evidence to a Fabian Commission early years, which if you haven't seen it, I would also encourage you to read that. Anne has a long history of engaging on topics relating to education and children, including working with Harriet Harman on developing Sure Start, which I can guarantee with this audience someone will ask a question on that. So prepare yourself, everyone. Anne, over to you.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, really good to be part of this really positive discussion today. When I speak to families, what they tell me, and indeed kids themselves, what they tell me is they want a government that is ambitious for them, that gives them hope, that is determined and that has purpose, and that can stand alongside them in their mission to bring up their kids and be able to get the best future for their kids. And I think that really comes to the heart of what my message is today, that I think there is an opportunity, desperate need, of course, in terms of inequalities and the pandemic that has really rocked both families and children themselves, but to really now look at renewing what the offer is to children and families. We can say make it the best place for children to grow up. I know it's easier to say than do, but I think that mission is something that parents will understand and will get behind. And the outcome and the purpose, of course, life chances, but also social mobility, also economic growth. These all, as everyone has been saying today, come together. So I think we should be shouting about children, children, children. We don't often hear leaders or prime minister speeches on children alone. And I think there's an opportunity there. I think that's a desperate thing that people want to hear. What does that mean? Well, of course, we've heard about, Bridget, you talked about early years, and so important with that, and people do want to get beyond the clunkiness of whether it's about kids or whether it's about parents, because, of course, it's a bit of a job lot for most families, and transforming that and representing that in many ways as again, another really very tangible step towards helping families get on and bring up their children. And that kind of progression, understanding that children and families change over time, so that whole to be alongside them throughout childhood, from cradle right through to career, is so important. There are massive challenges, of course. So, I think, again, parents know these things can't happen overnight. They know it will take time. The huge north-south disparities are enormous and felt so deeply, as so many of you know, and, do impact on every aspect of children's life chances and families' life chances. I think we have to be honest that the education system isn't working for an awful lot of kids at the moment. We've got a third of kids leaving school without basic levels of qualification. And that's such a waste of talent for everyone, but also such diminished life chances for them. I think that needs a real focus and a real determination to change. And when I see some of the brilliant ways that some schools do that, a really inclusive school, the kind of support for children with special educational needs, the kind of support for families that goes alongside that, the kind of support as children progress. And of course, I would say, whatever we call it, some kind of Sure Start program that brings services together around school. It was, I've always said, a historic mistake to get rid of that or to shrink that. I do think we have to make government in all of its machinery work for children rather than against. And, the nearer I've seen how so often it opens up gaps that children, the most vulnerable children, fall through. And I do think that means being very clear about putting, a name on a plate. I know that seems as though it might be a superficial way, but actually I think it's important. We do need a department about children. Yes, with schools and yes, with families. So let's bag some of that back again. And then that focus on those hundreds of thousands of children at the moment who are not in school, who are missing out or aren't reaching that potential. I would say schools are part of the community, and I think we've seen that so much over the years of the pandemic. They're anchors within the community, but let's release them to the community. So, one thing I've said over the decades, let's open those schools and those precious facilities in them. Let's open them up to the communities, not for teachers to run those sessions, but for community groups to use them, because too many of them are still padlocked at times, that parents want them. When you go to a country that has given admission to children, they often define themselves about what they want for children, how they're going about it. And I think over the next decade, there's an opportunity to do that. There's a huge need to do it. But I also think it's what parents and indeed children want to hear. So we need to unleash the potential of those individuals through education, but through that wider support and for the country as a whole.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Anne, for that contribution. Before I go to our last but not least speaker, I would encourage you all to think of some questions to ask our fantastic panel, including the individuals that might be hiding behind the pillow. I can see you. You may want to move slightly over this way, just so I can see you if you do want to ask a question. So our final speaker is Darren Northcott, who is National Officer for Education for the NASUWT, the Teachers Union. He's previously worked as a primary school teacher and has a long track record of providing evidence to numerous parliamentary committees. Darren, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ben, and hello everyone. I could just stop by saying my remarks could be limited to just what Anne said, but I think I might kind of make a few additional comments. But on this occasion, very much. The NASUWT represents teachers right across the UK, and that gives us an interesting opportunity to conduct an exercise in compare and contrast. You've got 4 different jurisdictions in the UK, each grappling with the same problems, each trying to go about it, sometimes in very different ways. I also need to say, just to be compliant with my own contract, is the NASUWT is not affiliated to any political party. Just want to make that point. We will work with any political party that believes in an equitable and effective education system, that recognises that education is a public good and a human right. So I'll leave you to speculate which parties you think make that list and which don't. I'm sure you've all got very strong views on that. And we are talking about challenges. I think that's very understandable. But I do want to start by recognising the strengths of our education and children's services sector, particularly, and you might expect me to say this, the hard-working staff in all those children's services who turn up every day in, day out, and do the best they can by the children and young people they serve, often in very difficult and challenging circumstances. And that commitment is certainly a strength that Labour can look to build on. But challenges there certainly are. There are problems, and I would say in some respects, aspects of our education and children's services sector are in crisis. So just to give you an example of what I would describe as a crisis, at the moment my union and all other recognised national teacher and education unions are going through the process of engaging with the School Teachers Review Body, and one of the things we look at there is teacher supply. And I think it is fair to say we have a recruitment and retention crisis in our schools. Not enough graduates are contemplating teaching as a career, and those that are teaching have a greater propensity than ever to consider leaving teaching. And without that skilled workforce in place, whatever ambitions you have for the education and children's services sector, you can't deliver them without that workforce. So it's central to our analysis. There is a rebuilding job to do. There's no question about that. And it is very complex. I think anyone looking at this fairly would understand the complexity and would understand that this is not something that can be addressed overnight. It will take time. But perhaps if I were to make one suggestion to Labour and the left generally, is to look at and try and put back what is largely missing from our education and children's services sector at the moment. And that is that sense of collaboration and partnership across services and within services that helps us to support and give the highest quality services that we possibly can. And I would think about, in terms of considering that, I would think about where we were heading before May 2010, a significant date, and where we've headed after. May 2010. Because when Labour left office in May 2010, it had a track record on education and children's services of which it could be rightly proud. Not everything was perfect. And my organisation certainly was not backward in coming forward with criticisms of that government and the way in which it went about things. But when you look back at what that government achieved and what has subsequently been dismantled deliberately, it is difficult to look at that without a profound sense of regret. And just thinking about those achievements of that Labour government, it's incredible to think about what was put in place. The Every Child Matters agenda, Sure Start, which Anne was very closely involved with, making sure that every child and young person got the best possible start that they could. Things like Contact Point, information sharing across different children's services, that's broken down entirely over the past 12 years. Children and young people's trusts at local authority level, bringing agencies together to work with each other. In education, a 14 to 19 qualifications reform agenda that would have addressed many of the disparities of esteem we see in different learning pathways. Behaviour and attendance partnerships, recognising that the behaviour of children is everyone's responsibility locally, not just one. So we can't cut and paste from 2010 and that period and just plonk those solutions into the world of 2023. It's very different. But that principle of collaboration, partnership, I think is a core Labour value and is a core value that should guide the development of policy in what will be, of course, very difficult circumstances. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Darren, for that contribution. So it's now over to Q&A. Okay, great. We do have only 15 minutes, I'm afraid. I think I can squeeze an extra couple of minutes out. So my request to you is, this really is a time for questions, not statements. I will be interrupting you if you take more than, say, 15 to 20 seconds. So please do prepare your question in the context of that. I also ask our panellists, please, that I'll give you a little more than 30 seconds to respond to them, but please don't feel the need to respond to all of the questions. Just somehow work between yourselves to answer all the questions without, making it look a little obvious. George is with the microphone over there. I'm going to stand up because I can't see people near the back. So, George, if you want to go to the individual over there by the window. And then I'll point the next one out after that, rather than you running around.
Good morning, Conference. Councillor Debbie Andre. I'm the Cabinet Member for Children's Services, Education and Lifelong Skills on the beautiful Isle of Wight. I think we've all heard and agreed that there are many themes coming through. Early intervention, partnership working. Marianne spoke about a corporate responsibility and a different way of providing and delivering our education. Does the panel agree that there is too much focus on academia and that we need to develop our young people to be good citizens and that that should be the priority moving forward?
Thank you very much. And then George, to the individual at the back, so you don't have to walk too far.
Very kind of you.
Thanks very much, and isn't it refreshing to hear people praising the achievements of the last Labour government?
If you can move away from the camera, please. I
Sorry,
think the camera.
how's that?
There we are. That's
okay.
Thank you. Now, do you want to just move towards where George is?
Sorry.
I won't count this into your 15 seconds.
Okay. Thank you very much. How's that? How's that?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay.
That's good.
Hi, I'm Julian Eccles from Hammersmith, where we were delighted to be the pioneer organisation that pioneered free universal breakfast in primary schools, a policy that Bridget, we're really pleased has been now adopted by the party. Please do come and see it in action in White City anytime soon. We'd love to have you there. My question is really about the early years, where we have concentrated, and the priority that we have there versus the priority perhaps on tuition fees. And when can we really grasp the nettle and be more open about the fact that in terms of equity, life chances and everything else, it makes much more sense to support investment in those early years rather than with the regressive benefit of tuition fees.
Thank you. The individual, come a bit close this way towards me, George. The one who's just turned around to look at George, I want to give it you, yes, away. Yes, you. Thank you.
This will be quick. No one has mentioned the arts at all. There's lots of stuff about preparing kids for the future, whatever. But I'm a child of sad though. I never like kids, I admit, but hey, I've gone back to school. I've actually, as an adult, I've actually gone back to education. I'm doing maths. I'm doing level 1 in functional skills. So, but no one has at all in this panel mentioned the arts at all. There's a lot of stuff, all that stuff, but I'm just curious what how those thoughts are.
Bridget,
and I'll try and keep it brief. I mean, early years absolutely has to be central to the work of the next Labour government, and as Anne and Darren have talked about, we did amazing things in terms of the early years from government. Those gaps open up so early, and our response has to come early as well, and that whole point that Darren was making around partnership working too, I think is just incredibly important. Just to the question around... sorry, is that... Oh, okay, sorry. Just to the question around, you know, the purpose of school, and I don't think that we should have to compromise on. Okay. I don't think we should have to compromise where it comes to standards. I think high standards in our schools are incredibly important, but I don't think that has to run in opposition to making sure that children leave school feeling well-rounded, that they've had a really great basis, that they're resilient, that they're happy, that they've had a really fulfilling experience. And part of what we've set out around ending tax breaks on private schools is around making sure that we can drive up standards in all of our schools for every child. And that does involve making sure we've got brilliant teachers in all of our classrooms. And Darren is absolutely right that we face a real problem at the moment around teacher supply, and ending those tax breaks would allow us to deliver more teachers into our classrooms and to ease the pressure and the workload that so many of our brilliant teachers are already under, which is part of the reason that so many are leaving in their droves, and we have to address that if we're to make sure that all children get a great start.
Thank you, Bridget. Anne?
Yeah, so on the academia question, I agree completely with what Bridget said. I think what we want is children to be able to look at the workforce of tomorrow and have the confidence, the communication skills, the agency, and the entrepreneurial abilities to be able to navigate all of that. And for me, it's much more about a rounded sense of development. It's what you measure, though, at the end of the day that's really important. At the moment, that's not measured, and people say endlessly, yeah, I do the stuff that's measured, and then I do often say the important things. Yeah, in terms of the arts, that absolutely needs to be part of that. That needs to be really established. And I would say as well, we need to look at what happens to kids when they're not in school, and all those softer ways of learning around the holidays, around parents, you know, and that's about public realm as well as what we do with the buildings in the public space as well.
Thank you, Anne. Just to give a little pitch on in relation to arts, the Fabians last year produced a report on the National Music Service. Yes. I wrote it. That's why I'm pitching it. So, you know, please do read that, and Bridget, please do consider it. Darren, over to you.
Just very briefly, absolutely share those concerns about the status of arts and creativity in our curriculum. It's incredibly important. I'd agree with Bridget as well. I don't think we need to look at this as a trade-off between high standards and breadth and balance. I think both go together, and actually both are mutually complementary. I remember a clear message, again, from that last Labour government, was that if you have breadth and balance in the curriculum, and you care about a child leaving school with a good GCSE in maths and English, which is important, sometimes that breadth and balance for some children is what brings them into school so they can access the learning, so they can get that GCSE in English, that GCSE in maths, that unlocks so many doors for them. So I think we have to look at them together and how they complement each other, not say it's standards versus creativity or citizenship, and all of that is very important. They all reinforce each other.
Thank you, Darren. Mariana?
Yeah, I feel really passionately about the arts. One of the things I did when I was working in the city many moons ago was I was in the part of the philanthropy team that would take children that were on a sort of pathway to leaving school without any qualifications, and were deemed to be the naughtiest children. We used to take them to the theatre, and we had a programme with the Tricycle. It was then called the Tricycle Theatre, and you would take them to a play and afterwards say that there was going to be a buffet, and what they didn't realise was the actors would come down and talk to them, and it was an absolutely phenomenal programme. And actually I'm still in contact with a child that we took along who was so taken with everything, is now into set design. And it's about opening up. The arts is just a phenomenal way of opening up new opportunities. So I really hope that there's a level of investment that's needed by the new Labour government coming in.
Thank you. Yeah?
I'll be very brief because some of the questions I tried to address already in my opening statement. So I absolutely agree with the idea of moving away from this completely goal-oriented and passing exams education curricula to actually focus on problem solving and citizenship education and all of these issues. I think the arts play a major role in this. I'm very glad that someone brought this question up because it's fundamental, and we have several examples in many countries. Venezuela, for example, I know Venezuela, blah blah blah. But look at the examples that they had with this generation orchestra that they gave instruments to kids in poor backgrounds, and the difference that it made in breaking the stigma. But my main message on this is that regardless of what the course that people choose in their education path, they need to feel valued in society. We cannot only say and point children to that they have to follow a traditional path, so to say, that they have to go from high school and then university, and this is the only valid path for society. We need to make sure that either vocational training is also important, and that we give value to the children and to the kids that are learning in different ways and that are going into different paths. And I think this is fundamental to create a bigger sense of community.
Thank you. There you are, George. This individual here.
Hi, thank you very much. Last December I was delighted to be selected to be the PPC for Gloucester, and one of the key things that's going to come up on the doorstep in Gloucester is education, because 1 in 4 of our primary schools are rated by Ofsted as either inadequate or requiring improvement. I know, Darren, we could have a whole other session on the adequacy of those Ofsted appraisals. But I think, you know, we've got the start of a policy here, but what I really need for the doorstep is what's our message of hope? And I think that's the word that Anne used that really resonated, hope, because those schools are inevitably in the poorest parts of my city, and I need to tell their parents what our hope is for their kids in a graspable term for that, and that's where we can really win votes for the next election. So I'd like to hear the panel's thoughts on that.
Thank you, and congratulations for being selected, and we look forward to you winning in 18 months' time. Yes, you.
Thank you. Fiona from Lambeth College. So it's lovely to see you. And we're very interested in the policy for further education. So we've had a lot about schools, we've had mention of university. We had a question about adult learners from a colleague earlier. FE plays a vital role for young people and also adults.
Fantastic, thank you. And then there was an individual. Yes, you. No, George. Didn't. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, my question was very similar on further education. I thought today with the presentations, which were really interesting, the headline is children. Why not young people? Why not adults? My goodness me, this world has changed since 2010 in relation to Brexit, in relation to skills, the deficit of young people, and the changes that adults actually are going to face in terms of the adult market and getting retrained. And as a local chair of our local college, it just seems to be silent within what Labour is doing. And I really do think it's an open goal and a real opportunity. I know we discuss it in relation to devolved skills. What does it mean? How is that going to work? How does that work for adults and young people? I really do think it's silent and it needs to be louder.
Bridget, over to you.
Yep. So just to pick up on the first question last, and Fiona, we met when we came with David Blunkett to launch Labour's Commission around skills. So it has been a really important part of what we've been thinking about, and we've already taken on some of those key recommendations where it comes to apprenticeship levy reform, to make sure that people throughout their lives do have the chance to upskill and to reskill, because as you say, the world of work is changing fast, and the skills that people will need to change in that time too. And there are some straightforward and obvious ways where we could make it easier to allow people to get the skills that they need. But it does also have to be a really central mission of that next Labour government. And you know, we've set out that we will establish Skills England to bring together the work right across government where it comes to skills and lifelong learning. Of course, the Department for Education is the key driver of much of that, but we have to work with colleagues in the Bayes department, we have to work with DWP. It has to be a big part and a really kind of collective endeavour to make sure that we drive up skills in so many parts of our country. When you look at the levels of basic and functional skills in so many parts of our country, it hasn't shifted in a decade, and you know, it's a scandalous waste of human talent. It holds people back and it holds our economy back, and we'll have to tackle that. In terms of congratulations, I look forward to coming and joining you and seeing some of the challenges, but also I think I'm sure there is brilliant work going on with some of the staff doing their best in very challenging circumstances. I absolutely take on board what you say, and you know, having a message for parents with school-age children is going to be a key part of what we go into the next election saying. I think we need a real focus on those areas and those schools where schools have been stuck for too long, and I think that's a big gap in the current system that we have where it comes to accountability, not just where we identify problems, but actually where we seek to fix them, and that's the part of the system that I don't think is working.
Okay, thank you. Mariana?
Yeah, I would just add that partnership is also really key.
Yeah.
In my ward, we have a Lambeth Council, together with a partner, has funded coding classes, after school coding classes, and those are the kind of initiatives that the council alone won't have the budget to do, but with partnership we can actually provide and open up opportunities for our young people. So I really believe in the power of partnership.
Okay, fantastic. Jeff?
So on the issue of further education, two things. One of them, back in 2005, during a socialist government in Portugal, we developed a program called New Opportunities that was strictly focused on the issues of adults and reskilling or recognizing the skills that they had. This was focused mainly for people that would struggle to find jobs because they finished school earlier than what they should. So it was about recognizing the skills that they had acquired through work over the years and giving them a diploma that would certify that. This was one focus. The other one was to actually adapt the skills that they had to a different labor and a changing labor market. And on the second regard is that the European Commission is actually very attentive to the question that you've brought up. And this year, 2023, is going to be the European Year of Skills, and the project of the Commission is actually focused on that and to actually adapting the skills that people need to the needs of the labor market, especially in terms of healthcare, for example, that is a major need, but also in the green and digital transition and to preparing people for these challenges.
Fantastic, thank you. Darren?
Just very briefly on the points you were raising around school improvement and how we kind of can embed that and have better practice in that respect. I'm not going to talk about a specific situation in Gloucester, but speaking generally, one of the issues we have in our system is that good practice is sometimes quite sticky, and it's sometimes quite difficult to get that good practice and learn from each other. That's why I've emphasised so strongly partnership between different institutions, between different schools in a community, between schools and local authorities, between schools and government. That partnership is a key way in which we can intervene and help those schools that need help so that we raise standards across the piece. So accountability is critical. We've got to hold schools accountable, but for the right things in the right way. Collaboration and partnership between institutions, everyone working together, everyone taking collective responsibility for the progress of children and young people. I think that's at the heart of it.
Fantastic, thank you, Darren. Anne?
Yeah, just using my time on your question, really. I think we've got to understand that the social context that children are living in will affect what happens in the classroom and in the school. When children come to school and they've got chronic anxiety, in fact, probably won't be going to school if they've got chronic anxiety. There's domestic violence at home, they're hungry, they've got special educational needs, they're not going to be able to learn. So absolutely partnerships, but purposeful partnerships that are expected and be able to be guaranteed for those kids and parents. And this is where I think you were talking about getting alongside families to help them get to the place they are. And I just would say on the tricky question of cost, we pay billions on the cost of crisis at the moment, and being able to look at that in a different way and invest to save. And finally, just in case I don't get asked again, the whole, one of the things that was really making progress and shows what governments can do pre-2010 was on the child poverty reduction and elimination and the unit. And that's something which is just screaming to be re-established in a very ambitious way.
Thank you, Anne. We're going to have one very, very quick round of questions. I would encourage panellists to, if they want to make any additional remarks to that. The first thing, is anyone for their first Fabian conference? Keep their hands up. You there?
Thanks. Just thinking about childcare, and you mentioned the importance of it working for both children and for parents. What do you think are the market changes that are needed in order to make that possible?
Thank you. And then everyone who wants to ask a question, the gentleman in blue over there.
Thank you. I'm Graham Johnson. I'm a SENCO and a Labour Prospective Council candidate in Rushcliffe. What needs to change to improve educational outcomes for pupils with special educational needs and disabilities?
Thank you. And then, hold on, let me stand up to get a proper look. The individual there, over there, the one, yes. No, bit closer to me, George. Her, yes. Thank you.
Thanks. The speaker from Portugal talked about the need for, or one of the benefits from schools being a place where people can mix from different social economic backgrounds, families. But lots of schools in the UK are actually quite socially economically segregated. So I wondered what the speakers think the government, a Labour government, should do about that, and what could be done to try to improve that.
Okay, thank you. Before I go, I would request speakers to keep to about a minute, because otherwise I will be in trouble with my boss. So let's start with you, Darren.
I'll given the time, I'll just pick up on the special educational needs point. Absolutely fundamental question, and we're still waiting for the government's response to its own green paper, and we still don't know what steps it intends to take next to address many of the problems that it created. Just again, this theme of partnership, one, certainly not the only, but one of the issues we have in our system is that, again, in 2010, we'd got to a place where education, health, and social care, the structures are in place to help those different services come together and support the needs of children holistically. That has broken down. The government belatedly recognises that things necessarily aren't in the place they need to be, but re-establishing that holistic approach to meeting children's need across health care and education, I think is fundamental to trying to get our system on a more equitable footing, but also on a more sustainable footing as well.
Thank you. Anne?
Completely agree with that, and I would just say identifying which kids need help as early as possible and having the support in place. And I'd say also with that is that it's not going to happen of its own accord. You know, you've got a green paper there that's got aspirational stuff in it, but it's not got the mechanism to drive it through, or you know, the funding to back it up. And again, another one of those, we're investing crisis at the moment. In terms of childcare, I do think that we do need to look again at where there are gaps. I think we need to engage with parents in that, need to have a much more equitable distribution of it throughout the, not only age range, but country, so that parents think there's something to do with them. And I do think we need to reinsert responsibilities to make sure that it's available to meet the needs of parents in an area which have dwindled away.
Thank you. Mariana?
Yeah, I would only add that we do also need to look at race in many aspects. You know, the colour of your skin actually has another layer of structural barrier for you. And especially when it comes to special educational needs as well. I know people that are struggling to get the right support, and it's just inequitable. So I would hope that the Labour government looks at race and racial outcomes in terms of education as well.
Joao?
I would say on this regard that it's as discriminatory to treat differently what's equal as it is to treat equally what's different. So one of the first things that you need to do, I would say, is that you need to give the proper means to schools that are in most challenging neighborhoods, I would say, and not address them as schools that are in more, I would say, privileged, to simplify, privileged neighborhoods. So I think the means need to be different. Secondly, do not cave into education vouchers and any of those neoliberal BS, because it really creates more division in society and allows, of course, the wealthy to choose the better schools, and this contributes to this silo system where people do not mingle. And finally, my final remark, because I think this is the main thing that I would like to bring today, is that invest in the training of teachers and remuneration as well. If you look at the example of, for example, in Finland, where they had a very deep reform in their education system, they started with the training and education of teachers, because this is fundamental also to adapt the education system to the challenges of tomorrow.
Thank you. And Bridget, final word to you.
Great, thanks very much. I mean, we've quite rightly talked a lot about the challenges, and there are many, many challenges, but I am genuinely very hopeful and optimistic about the change that we can make if we're ambitious enough in thinking about where we can really make progress. We did before from government, and we'll do so again. I think childcare is one area where the next Labour government can and will make meaningful and lasting change to the life chances of so many children. I believe we need to fundamentally rethink how we regard childcare in this country. It should be an integral part of our education system, and we need to make sure that it's affordable and it's available, but also that we have really high quality and high standards of education and care. And to the point around market reform, absolutely, that has to be a part of it. And we also need to make sure that the brilliant people delivering that education and care are properly supported and properly rewarded for the work that they do. It isn't right that the standards within the sector are often very poor, that many people delivering that brilliant start in life for our children are paid a little more than the minimum wage. And we have to make sure that if there is additional investment that we can put in place from government, and we'll face tough choices around what we can do, that we make sure we drive up standards for children, for families, and also for staff in the sector too. That has to all come together as one.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for your welcome. Now, of course, implementing all of the brilliant ideas we've heard today requires winning the next general election. We have a panel starting in a few minutes in the light on how to win the next general election. So I would encourage you all to go and watch it.